The 300 Weatherby Magnum was the original Ultra Magnum. It has set the bar for high velocity 30 caliber cartridges. It is the quintessential elk cartridge. But what happens if you neck it up to 338 caliber? Is it a better cartridge? Do you get better performance? Is it a flat trajectory? Let's find out. In today's video, we are comparing 300 Weatherby Magnum to the necked up 340 Weatherby Magnum. Hope you enjoy the video. In the early 20th century, there was really two mainstay 30 caliber cartridges. This one here, the 30-06 Springfield, and if you wanted to step up to something quite powerful, you could get a 300 H&H Magnum. In 1944, a wildcatter by the name of Roy Weatherby introduced his 300 Weatherby Magnum, which the parent case is the 300 H&H. The big difference is there isn't near as much of a taper, and then there's that double radius shoulder. But the case is basically almost the exact same length, and when you don't have that tapered shoulder, you are really getting good numbers in the 300 Weatherby. To put some perspective in it, the 300 Weatherby shoots the same bullets the 30-06 does, 400 to 500 feet per second faster. And from 1944 until 1996, the 300 Weatherby was the fastest factory optioned 30 caliber Magnum. Until in 96, Weatherby outdid themselves in providing us the 30-378 Weatherby. What kind of performance do you get with a 300 Weatherby? Well, one of the popular bullets, a 180 grain, you can get that mid 3,200 feet per second. 3,250 feet per second is fast for a 180 grain bullet. To put things into perspective, the 30-06 is shooting that same bullet around 2,700 feet per second. Now, other bullet weights, you can get a 200 grain, 3,100 feet per second, a 210 grain, 3,000 feet per second. This really is an Ultra Magnum. Then in 1958, Winchester introduced two Magnums. One would succeed this one, 338 Winchester Magnum. One would not, 264 Win Mag. Then the 338 Win Mag and 264 Win Mag are based off that same 300 H&H case, but it's not a Magnum length. It is just your standard length. It was pushing bigger bullets at pretty darn good velocities. So 200 grain, mid 3,000 feet per second, a 225 grain at 2,800 feet per second. This 338 Win Mag really became the standard as, say, an elk cartridge. With the success of the 338 Win Mag, Roy Weatherby, well, he needed to one-up the Winchester Magnum. And so he provided a bigger 338 Magnum, and he called it the 340 Weatherby Magnum. What is it? It's just a 300 Weatherby case necked up to 338. Guessing some type of marketing ploy, he decided to call it the 340 Weatherby, just so people knew it was bigger than a 338 Winchester Magnum. Let's go ahead and look at the performance of this guy. So what's really cool about the 340 Weatherby is not only does it beat the Winchester Magnum, but it's shooting the same weight bullets that a 300 Weatherby would faster. Let's see. A 200 grain at 3,200 feet per second. A 225 grain at 3,000 feet per second. And then a 250 grain at 2,900 feet per second. Now, Weatherby has factory ammo with a 250 partition that's going 2,950. This guy is a monster when it comes to performance. Now, I've shot 225 grain bullets out of my 300 Weatherby, and I've topped it out around 2,900. So the 340 is more efficient. Real quick, I just wanted to show you how factory ammo compares between a 300 Weatherby and a 340 Weatherby. We're going to use the same type of bullet. The BC is not the same, so this is not a perfect comparison, but it's about as good as we're going to get with factory ammo. We're going to use a 180 grain Barnes TTSX in the 300 Weatherby with a muzzle velocity of 30,232 feet per second, energy 4,175 foot-pounds. You guys know how much I like going out to 400 yards, so at 400, bullets going 2,459 feet per second, 2,417 foot-pounds of energy. Pretty good. Also, on average, the recoil without a break in a 300 Weatherby, this is probably with about a 9-pound rifle, 36 foot-pounds. It's a lot. Let's move on to the 340 Weatherby. We are using a 225 grain TTSX at a muzzle velocity of 2,970 feet per second. Your energy, 4,407 foot-pounds. About a 250 foot-pound advantage out at 400 yards. 2,276 feet per second. The energy, about 175 more foot-pounds, roughly. Recoil, and about the same rifle, weight rifle, we're getting 42 foot-pounds of recoil. Yeah, you're probably not going to want to shoot this guy without a muzzle brake. What's the performance like when you hand load for both of these? This is my specific rifle performance from my 300 Weatherby with a 200 grain AccuBond. And, well, it's going 3,100 feet per second, energy 4,268 foot-pounds. And then out to 400 yards, you know, you're getting 2,714 foot-pounds. It's quite the performer, only 21.7 inches of drop. So how does the 300 Weatherby do as a long-distance cartridge? Pretty darn well. Now, I would never advocate for people to hunt at these distances out to 900 yards. But, I mean, you don't get below 1,500 foot-pounds until probably around 850 yards. And at 900, 184.3 inches of drop. 800, 135 inches of drop. This thing is a serious performer. As for the 340 Weatherby, we're going to use a 225 grain AccuBond. It's somewhat close to the 300 Weatherby's 200 grain AccuBond. Same velocity. I've heard multiple reports from 340 Weatherby owners that they can get this thing going pretty quick, up to 3,100 feet per second. And that gives you 4,802 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. At 400 yards, the bullet's going a little bit slower than the 300 Weatherby, but the energy is quite a bit more. It is a 25 grain bigger bullet, and you're at 2,955 foot-pounds, so probably almost 250 more foot-pounds of energy, 22.1 inches of drop, so it's not as flat, but it's within an inch. How does the 340 Weatherby do at longer distances? Pretty darn good. At 800 yards, you're still having 1,855 feet per second, 1,720 foot-pounds of energy. So it still has a little bit of an advantage over the 340 Weatherby. And then just a little bit more drop, not a huge difference. I recently did a video comparing the 280 Remington to the 270 Winchester, which is very similar to a 300 and 340 Weatherby comparison. They both use the same case. The 300 is a lot more popular than a 340, just like a 270 is a whole lot more popular than a 280 Remington. So, is it worth it to get a 340 Weatherby? Well, I think that really depends on what kind of animals you're trying to take. I think the 340 Weatherby is definitely a little bit better at dangerous game, although the 300 is no slouch. And, well, the 340 Weatherby, it's going to be harder to find factory ammo in it than a 300 Weatherby. It's going to be harder to find brass. But there are actually rifles in 340 Weatherby, unlike 280 Remington. Now someday, I'm going to get a 340 Weatherby, and I look forward to it. The question is the added recoil worth the performance? Let me know in the comments.